Kirsten Heinrich here. The purpose of this video today is to deepen and develop our understanding about a part of our mind known as the inner judge, the superego, the inner critic. I introduced this already in my last video. The inner judge is actually one of my favorite psychological subjects. Why is that? It is because it is so very core to our well-being, to really understand and work with this part of our personality and our minds. And I must say I've personally changed so much in a very life-enhancing way by working with my inner judge, which used to be very fierce. And actually so have many of my clients. A lot of psychological work is centered around our belief systems that kind of come together in this inner judge. So today I will talk about the context in which our inner judge, our superego, develops, and I'll be sharing a couple of interesting examples with you. And at the end of the video, I would like to introduce you to 3 fundamental skills and ways of reflecting and evolving this part of ourselves. So let's start talking about the nature of our inner judge and how this part of our mind actually comes about. Interestingly, in a seminar on the inner critic I attended a while ago, maybe a year ago, someone compared the superego to a cork in a champagne bottle. And I thought, wow, what an interesting and spot-on comparison, really. And as I was reflecting on this analogy, I understood more deeply that our inner judge and the negative self-talk that arises from this part of our mind truly inhibits and stifles our natural life force, our vitality, our spark, and our inner strengths. It pretty much slows down the flow of our good, juicy, and healthy energy that allows us to feel alive, and it gradually causes stagnation. So what do I actually mean by our life force? That's an important question to actually think about. What is our life force? Well, it is the force and the energy that we infuse our life's projects with. The things we choose to commit to. And this could be our professional lives, our jobs, parenthood, it's a big one, our relationships, the places we live in. It could be our emotional and psychological development. Basically, we can really infuse anything with our life force that has value and meaning to us, and that we want to grow and develop and nourish with our energy, with our life force. So our life's projects are the things we give our time, attention, care, and love to. They're the aspects of our life that we invest our resources in, such as our love and devotion, our attention, our focus, our direction. This could be also our money, and just to name a few of our resources. So coming back to the inner judge and our negative self-talk, this part of ourselves very much inhibits and undermines and sometimes even stops the flow of our energy, like the cork in a champagne bottle. It doesn't allow our enthusiasm and creativity and playfulness to bubble and flow. It actually spoils it and it undermines it. And our negative self-talk, as you know, as we all know, makes us quite anxious, doubtful, and depressed. stagnant and fearful. Have you ever experienced this at some point in your life? I believe most of us actually have. That the superego is a multi-layered and complex psychic structure, which we actually all have to deal with. And by many years of working as a clinical psychologist, I can truly attest to the potentially very destructive and powerful nature of this part of our minds. And this is whether we are aware of it or not. It plays such a central role in most of our psychological and emotional problems, including self-doubt, low self-esteem, depression, obsessions, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, self-harm, suicidal ideation, relationship difficulties, eating disorders, addictions, and many more. So the inner judge is an assimilation of values and belief systems that we internalize from our experiences with the authority figures in our childhood, our parents, teachers, and really society in general. And the development of this part of ourselves is happening unconsciously over a number of years, starting from babyhood, infancy, into our later childhood years. And actually, the interesting thing is that these internalized experiences and values are not always explicitly expressed, even though they can be. Often they are actually much more implicit, but certainly are repeated, unspoken and spoken messages about life, ourselves and relationships, and the future. So let me share an example with you to kind of make this more real and illustrate this. Imagine a little girl who is sent to school by her mom every day, even when she's not well, and sometimes when she's quite ill. Sometimes actually her teachers have to send her home because she wasn't well enough to manage being in school. This little girl, who has become a woman in her early 40s, is now sitting with me in my consulting room. Through the transmitted values with her family, she learned that she has to push through and soldier on even when she's not feeling well. And that's what she's sharing with me and reflecting on in her psychological work. She was rewarded and validated by her parents for working hard in school, getting top marks and being a very good and compliant and self-sufficient girl and teenager. Yet emotionally she was kind of neglected and not responded to, as both her parents were also hardworking in their respective professions and really not emotionally available, engaged and attuned. They didn't know how to do that. Her mother was never able to say, "Darling, you're not well, you need to stay at home and rest a few days to help you get better." My client never experienced this kind of parenting. And now, as a professional woman in her 40s, she is unaware of her sort of vulnerabilities. She's unable to discern when she needs a break, telling herself that she needs to keep going at all cost. She's successful and very hardworking. She's a solicitor, and she very rarely takes time off work, even when she's feeling physically and emotionally exhausted and awful, really. So therefore she came to see me seeking psychological help due to recurring burnout, really, and profound physical and emotional exhaustion, and the possible diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a serious diagnosis. And in the course of our work, we identified my client's very harsh, critical and relentless inner judge, which consisted of very embedded and fixed belief systems around the theme of working hard, achieving success, coupled with the ideas that resting and taking time off is weak and wrong and pathetic. And my client hated her body for not functioning in accordance with her relentless, very unrealistic standards, which on the other hand engendered feelings of deflation, inadequacy, sadness, shame, anger and anxiety, and the big one for her was guilt. So as this example illustrates, as we mature and live life, most of us encounter some difficulties along the way. These could be an unexpected illness, a painful loss, relationship struggles and breakups, or any form of emotional psychological difficulties. It could be simply dissatisfaction and discontent with life. And these kind of painful and uncomfortable experiences often force us to stop and turn inside. And some of us may seek therapy at this point in our lives and will encounter more consciously our inner judge, which causes us a lot of suffering. Let's talk a bit about why this inner judge is so critical and unhelpful. Many of us grew up in families and cultures in which the powerful myth that vulnerability is a weakness and a flaw permeated people's thinking. To make this more real, I'll give you an example from my life, and I'm very sure most of you have your very own valuable experience to share about this. So my parents were very young children during the Second World War, exposed to starvation, bombing, trauma, terror and fear on a daily basis. Their parents, my grandparents, lived, of course, in survival mode during the war. And thinking about it, their lives were about the challenge of bringing food to the table and feeding the family. Surviving was the first priority, and helping their children and loved ones to survive. So my parents, when they were kids, spent many nights and days hungry in air raid shelters. It really is hard to imagine these days, even though it's actually only 80 years ago. But within this historical context, previous generations' understanding of their children's and their own emotional needs and vulnerabilities was not high on the agenda. And as a result, many of us were brought up by traumatized parents, which unfortunately often translates into emotionally unconscious parents, not aware of their own feelings, vulnerabilities and inner experiences. And I believe our parents, even though doing their very best, often were emotionally not engaged, quite harsh, distant, rejecting, maybe emotionally and mentally not well. And as a result, many of us have not experienced consistent, loving, gentle, conscious and mature parenting. And I believe that the collective consciousness was simply not evolved enough yet for that to be the case. So to come back to the inner judge, If we grew up in a predominantly critical and emotionally unavailable family culture, we are very likely to develop into adults who tend to be dismissive and not engage with our own vulnerability. Just as many of our parents could not helpfully respond to our sadness, our anger, our helplessness, our jealousy, our rage, our inevitable disappointments, nor can our inner judge. So the inner judge is not very evolved, it hasn't got empathy, and it has a very blinkered, narrow perspective. It is harsh and controlling and invested mainly in maintaining the status quo. Keep things the same, secure and safe. It wants to protect us from the emotional discomfort that inevitably comes with change and growth and expansion and transformation. And you may have noticed that every time you move towards change or change happens in your life, the inner judge will be activated and is undermining messages. And so its function is to maintain the status quo and oppose our vitality and transformation. Therefore, if we continue to abide by the authority of our inner critic, we are very unlikely to expand and grow. And if we keep within our comfort zone, which is a very narrow bandwidth of keeping things safe and predictable, we will not be able to learn how to deal with and emotionally regulate our feelings of anxiety, fear, grief, sadness, loneliness, anger and disappointment, which come with change. And these feelings are a natural part of living. They arise when we take risks and when we make mistakes, which is part of learning and growing. So this is how our inner judge inhibits and stifles our capacity to be fully alive. And this is why the superego is compared to the metaphorical cork in a champagne bottle. Its function is to narrow our experience of ourselves, the world, and other people. It doesn't allow and support us to be and to feel the wide spectrum and range and nuances of our experience. So what can we do about this? For us to move into our aliveness and vitality and strengths, to remove the cork from the champagne bottle, we are invited to do some inner work, which involves the development of a new skill set, a new way of being. And I will share with you now 3 significant aspects and skills we can evolve throughout our life's journey to conquer the inner judge. And if well developed, these skills will support and carry us through life and its many ups and downs, many successes and disappointments and heartbreaks, like no other skill set. So first, it is building a healthy and harmonious relationship between our conscious minds and our unconscious minds. And this involves to learn and understand what is in our unconscious mind. And I made a video about this, which I called 3 ways of connecting with our unconscious, where you can listen again, and I will put the link in the description below, how to work with our unconscious, how to connect with our unconscious. And part of this is to transform our inner judge, which is no easy task at all. It truly requires a commitment and some staying power. And we can do this by identifying and reflecting and evolving our belief systems that are woven into our superego in our early years in life. Because many of our belief systems are formed in childhood, in a very different historical and social context, as I've described earlier. And therefore, these belief systems simply don't serve us anymore. Many of our belief systems require an update. The world around us is constantly changing, and our superego structure formed in childhood is not adaptive to the world around us anymore. It needs to evolve too. The second skill is to develop and strengthen our life-giving ability of making friends with our feelings, our emotional world. And this will allow us to move more deeply into our inner emotional landscape, and may take us at times to places of maybe deep sadness, grief, anger, loneliness, as well as enjoyable and emotionally rich and new experiences. This often is part of our healing journey, to have these difficult feelings and to learn to manage them, because we are not able to selectively numb and repress uncomfortable and painful feelings. If we repress and avoid what we call our more difficult experiences, we also numb our sense of vitality, joy and warmth and love and motivation. Our life force gets numbed too. And the third skill is to cultivate and strengthen our inner self-soothing capacity, which allows us to welcome, accept and manage our wanted and unwanted life experiences and all the feelings that life brings to us. So, to summarize, the three skills are to harmonize the relationship between our unconscious and our conscious mind, to make friends with our feelings by developing our self-soothing capacity. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I will see you again in my next video. Take care.